2 weeks ago, we upgraded the X-axis on my Creality Ender 3 with a linear rail. And in that video, I mentioned that we are going to be replacing the entire hot end assembly. And in today's video, we are going to be doing exactly that. Microswiss took their direct drive, dual geared, all metal combo and created a version for linear rails. And in today's video, I'm going to take you step by step while I install that into my 3D printer. Although in this video, I'm going to be installing this specifically in the Ender 3 that we upgraded 2 weeks ago, this hot end and extruder combo isn't just for the Creality Ender 3 and is going to be compatible with most 3D printers that are using linear rails. Now, Microswiss does have a PDF version of this install, but my goal with this video is to make it easier for you to follow along and hopefully fill in any gaps or questions you might have by just going based off that PDF. There's going to be a lot to cover, so without further ado, let's get right into today's video. As for the tools, you will be needing an adjustable wrench, a Phillips head screwdriver, a 7mm socket wrench, and a variety of Allen wrenches. The first thing we're going to do is open up this kit to take a look at all the things that come in the kit to give you a little bit of familiarity, and of course make sure you've got all the pieces that you should have. If you don't want to see this part, or certain parts you are already aware of, feel free to skip over. But again, for those that have not done an install like this before, I do think it's good to go over all of the items that come in the box. In the box, you'll find a QR code, which will take you to those PDF directions I mentioned. They'll also be in the description of this video. There will be the new heatsink and heat break, the heater block and the thermistor screw, the new extruder lever, a bag with a variety of things like the Capricorn tube, the motor mounting screws, and the screws and nuts for the filament guide, as well as the retaining clip, the tension adjustment screw, spring and knob, as well as the precision shoulder screw, the main body of the new extruder, as well as the aluminum belt mounting bracket and the 4 screws that will allow you to mount this to the linear rail, and a bag with a bunch of small screws, some spare parts, the tools, the grub screws, the plated brass nozzle, the silicone sock for your new hot end, the stepper motor extension cable, since the stepper motor will be moving from off to the side to on top of your hot end, the printed filament guide, and of course some zip ties to clean up your wiring and make sure that there's no wires that are getting pinched. I wanted to cover right off the get-go that when installing this onto a Creality Ender 3, if that's what you're installing it on, or any Creality machine, it does seem like they swapped out some of their motors. So the motor on the right is the one that came on my Ender 3, which has a push-fit gear versus one that's held in place by a grub screw, and you actually can't use those for this install because there's no flat spot. So I'll place a link in the description to where you could possibly buy one of the correct motors if yours does have that push-fit, but I wanted to make sure that I let that be known right away, that as I was installing this, I discovered that, hey, Creality changed things up and they're using a motor that's not compatible with some of their machines, it seems. Now that we've covered that, we can turn our heads to the actual install. The first portion of this is going to be disassembly. We need to remove the existing hot end carriage as well as the extruder. This does assume that you have an Ender 3 with a linear rail already installed, or a printer with a linear rail installed. If you are installing this on an Ender 3 and you want to install the linear rail first to be able to follow along, I can link you guys in the description of this video to where I show you how to install linear rail. It's actually quite simple to do, and then you'll be ready to carry on with the install. So again, regardless of the machine you have, we need to remove the existing hot end on the Creality Ender 3 or most Creality machines. That entails removing the fan housing as well as the hot end, which is going to be held in by 2 screws. I'm using the wrench in the back here to hold on to the nylon lock nuts. Now that the hot end is free, we are going to go ahead and place this hot end and the fan carriage or fan housing off behind the machine, and we're going to turn our attention to the X carriage. We're going to start off by removing the belts on the X carriage, and then we are going to remove the 4 screws that mount this to the linear rail. Since the belt is no longer on this, you're going to find that this thing wants to slide back and forth and all over the place, so I found it easiest to use my left hand to actually hold the X carriage in place and use my right hand to actually do the unscrewing. Once loose, we can go ahead and remove our old bracket, whatever you've got in place, and we are going to be installing the new X carriage. For this, we're going to need the aluminum belt mounting bracket, as well as the 4 bracket mounting screws that come in that same bag. Along with that, we're going to be needing the main body, which the main body is just going to be the biggest aluminum piece that comes in this kit that actually holds everything together. To install this, you're going to line up the belt bracket with the 4 holes on the linear rail. I use my left hand to then kind of keep it in place and grab the main body and then slide that on top of it. You kind of have to use both hands to keep everything in place, but you want to make sure that those 4 holes are lined up before obviously inserting those screws. And then for the screws, I just kind of quickly put them in a few turns just so that way everything was lined up and it wasn't so difficult to keep everything straight. And then I work diagonally, just installing one at a time. I don't recommend actually clamping anything down until you've got all 4 screws in, just to be on the safe side. But once you do, you will definitely want to tighten this, since this is the main connecting point from this aluminum housing or this aluminum body to the actual linear rail. Since the screws are small and delicate, though, I do recommend just hand tightening. You definitely don't need to put your whole arm into it. As you can see here, I just make sure it's nice and snug with the hand tight, and everything is good to go. Next, we're going to be loosening up the X-axis belt tensioner just by loosening these 2 screws. That'll give our belt enough slack to be able to install it on the new aluminum X carriage. To install it, we're just going to go ahead and pull it over the top and insert them into the 2 cutouts or slits in the bottom of the aluminum. And then we can go ahead and retighten that belt tensioner. To do so, I just use my left thumb to push the belt tensioner away from the center of the machine and create the tension that I want, and then tighten those 2 screws up again. For this install, we are reusing the thermistor and the heater cartridge that came on the Ender 3, and luckily for me, I didn't have a bunch of built-up filament on this hot end because it's fairly new. If you do have a bunch of built-up filament, you'll likely need to heat up the hot end while removing these things, and if you have to do that, please be careful. Use tools. You'll probably want to heat it up to anywhere between 160 to 200 Celsius roughly to loosen the plastic, but if you don't have a bunch of filament on your hot end or your heater block, it's much easier. You're just going to loosen the grub screw on the bottom and then completely remove the small screw that's holding the thermistor in place. Once you do that, you'll be able to slide out the thermistor and the heater cartridge. Just be careful with that small little bulb type thermistor. It's quite delicate, and you don't want to damage it. And we're also going to be reusing the Bowden tubing as a filament guide tube. But to remove that, you just push on the push fitting and pull the Bowden tubing away from it, and it will pull off, and you can kind of put all this stuff off to the back for now so we can turn our attention to the extruder. And again, with the extruder, like I mentioned, I didn't realize until after I had completely removed the extruder and the stepper motor that Creality had switched to a new style stepper motor. Whether this is just on some of their machines or this is the way they're going, I do not know, but you will need a stepper motor that has a flat portion on the post or on the shaft of the stepper motor to be able to install this. So I will do my best to find a source that I can link you guys to in the description of this video. If that does end up being the case where your stepper motor also is completely round and has this kind of press fit gear on it, then you will need to order one of those stepper motors or source one. So again, if I do find a source, I'll let you guys know in the description of this video. Regardless of the stepper motor that you find out that your machine has, we'll still need to remove the existing extruder. There are going to be 4 screws that hold the extruder to the stepper motor, and the first one you'll want to remove is the one for the tension arm. Once that's off the printer, then there is this other tension screw that's actually blocking access to one of the screws we need to remove, so you'll go ahead and just unscrew that, and then you will have free access to those last 3 screws. When you get down to the last 2 screws, I recommend holding the stepper motor with one hand just to make sure that it doesn't actually fall off of the machine and drop on the floor or smash your big toe or something like that. So again, as you see here, I use my other hand to just hold this in place. And once the screws are removed, you can unplug that stepper motor and just kind of let the cable hang there so we can turn our attention to the gear on the stepper motor. So there is usually 1 or 2 screws holding the gear to the stepper motor. In this instance, there is 2, so just go ahead and loosen those, and you'll be able to go ahead and just slide this gear off. Now we can go ahead and get the stepper motor and install it to the aluminum main body using the 3 included motor mounting screws. To do so, it's really simple. Just go ahead and place it in the opening on top for the stepper motor. The only thing you really need to make sure of is that you've got the plug facing the correct direction, which is upward, as you can see here by my thumb. You want to make sure that plug is on the top, and then just like we did with the linear rail screws, I just went ahead and loosely fit those 3 screws into place, and once I had the motor secured, I went ahead and tightened them down. Same goes, you want these to be nice and tight, but just hand tighten them. Don't put your whole arm into it because you can really strip these, and if you ever need to take anything apart for any reason, having stripped screws is a pain. So again, loosely install them and then just hand tighten them one by one. Once we've got the stepper motor secured, we will grab the extruder lever and the precision shoulder screw, and we will put that screw through the extruder lever so that way we can install it into the bottom right of the stepper motor. Just make sure that you've got the gear facing inward towards the post of the stepper motor. And we can grab the new extruder gear. For this gear, we need to make sure that we insert the set screw first. So make sure you insert it in the correct orientation. Like I show here, the set screw should be in the front, and it needs to be lined up with the flat portion of the stepper motor's post. Once you've got it on there, I just went ahead and did my best to line it up with the existing gear or the gear on that lever. And once I had it as close as I could as far as eyeballing it, I grabbed a piece of PLA that I then fed through the top of the extruder and clamped down with the lever. And then if you just go ahead and kind of pull the PLA back and forth, you can ensure that everything's lined up, and that if anything wasn't lined up, it'll go ahead and correct itself. Now that we know everything's lined up, I recommend using one hand to keep the tension on the extruder and the extruder gear, and then use your other hand to go ahead and tighten that set screw in place. Once it was tightened, I went ahead and just checked one more time to make sure everything lined up, and as we can see here, the gears are turning and everything is good to go. Next, grab the tension adjustment screw, spring, and knob, insert the spring onto the screw, and then we will go ahead and push that through the top of the extruder. There's a little slit, and that'll go into the lever. Then with the knob, we'll go ahead and just screw that onto place. As far as the correct amount of tension, MicroSwiss recommends that the screw should be flat with that tension knob, at least as a starting point. So as you can see here, I just kind of screw it until I see the screw go flush with that. If you're printing different materials like flexibles, you might need to adjust it, but that's a safe bet for a starting out point. Next up, we're going to grab the new heater block, the heat break, and the nozzle, and we're going to be installing these. We're first going to go ahead and hand tighten them, then use the included spanner wrench to tighten these a bit more. The only thing you need to make sure of is that you install these on the correct side. So if you look at the orientation that I'm installing this in, the heat break should be on the top while the nozzle should be on the bottom of the heater block. It does matter the orientation that you have those in. And then grab that included spanner wrench and just go ahead and hand tighten it. It's okay to put some pressure on this again, but just hand tighten it. Don't need to throw your whole arm into it. Same goes for the nozzle. We'll go ahead and fit that in and just screw that in as much as we can with our hand. Then using that exact same wrench, we'll do the same exact thing and just hand tighten it as much as we can to make sure that everything is nice and secured in place. Once done with that, take your heatsink and lay it on its back. So one side of the heatsink has these little chamfers on top, and that should be facing upward, as you can see pictured here. And we will slide that heater block that we just put together into the heatsink, and it should all sit nice and flat. I use my printer bed as a surface, but just make sure you've got it on a flat surface. That way we can grab the little included grub screw that comes in the kit, and this is what we're going to be using to connect the heatsink to the heater block. So just go ahead and loosely fit that in place, and then just like we've been doing all along, hand tighten that in. This is the one point that connects the heater block to the heatsink, so it needs to be nice and tight, but again, there's a difference between tightening it and over torquing it, so just nice and hand tight to make sure it's snug is all that you need. After that, we will grab the Capricorn tubing to insert into the heatsink. There is one side that's flat and one side that has a slit to it, so make sure the flat side is the side that you push into the heatsink. And we will also be using the original hot end screws to install this to the main body of the new X carriage. So we'll just take the Capricorn tubing and kind of slide it up the center portion there where the gears are. and take those original hot end screws and just place those in to the 2 holes on the hot end and clamp those down in place. Once the hot end is secured, we are then going to go ahead and install the existing thermistor and heater cartridge that we removed earlier on. It's basically going to be the exact opposite of what we did originally, so slide the heater cartridge in and the thermistor into the hole on the right side. In my opinion, it's easiest if you can kind of slide them both in one full swoop, so I just went ahead, slid the heater cartridge in, lined up the thermistor, and popped that into place. And then you're going to take the thermistor screw that's included with the kit and clamp that down, or I shouldn't say clamp that down. The wires on the thermistor are quite delicate, so you want this to be tight, but you definitely do not want to over tighten this. If you pinch those thermistor wires, you'll either get a bad reading, if you're lucky, and worst case scenario, you'll actually damage the thermistor. So just nice and snug is all that you need. And then for the heater cartridge, there's 2 screws on the bottom side of the heater block that you will need to tighten. On those, you can be a little bit more aggressive with your tightening because the heater cartridge is not nearly as fragile as that little bulb type thermistor that is what's used. Now we will turn on the 3D printer and heat everything up to 220 Celsius. The reason why we're doing this is because the metal expands when things are hot, and this will give us a chance to actually tighten everything down one more time. Once it's hit 220, we will take our adjustable wrench and we'll use that to grip the heater block. Again, remember everything is at 220 Celsius, so be careful, do not burn yourself. And I just went ahead and took my adjustable wrench, gripped the heater block, and used the included spanner wrench to once again, just hand tighten that nozzle, and with the heat, if anything has shifted or the metal has expanded, it'll just make sure that everything is nice and secure and you don't have any filament leaks or anything like that. Once the nozzle has been tightened, we'll do the exact same thing for that little set screw, that grub screw that holds the heat sink to the heater block. Just once again, go ahead and hand tighten it. Make sure that after everything is hot, it has still tightened. And once we've done that, go ahead and let your printer cool down and turn off the machine. So that way we can insert the silicone sock. Make sure you've let it cool down because it will be really hot if, if you don't. So I waited about 15 minutes. After that, we will grab the original 2 screws that held the fan housing on the Creality Ender 3, and we'll just go ahead and take that same fan housing and install it into the new X-Carriage main body. It's going to line up at the exact same 2 spots, so 1 screw will be on the top, 1 screw will be on the left, and this will again ensure that that fan housing is secured to this new X-Carriage. After that, grab the printed filament guide, which is the only printed piece, as well as the 2 screws and 2 nuts. These are the M3 by 10 millimeter screws and nuts, and we are going to be placing this where the old extruder and stepper motor was. Just go ahead and push the screws all the way through, and then on the bottom side we will place the nuts on the screws so that way we can secure this to that old extruder mounting bracket. We're going to be using this to connect the Bowden tube from this to the new extruder, and it'll just be acting as a guide tube for the filament. So we will take the existing Bowden tubing, and we'll need to remove that little red clip so that way the Bowden tube can fit in. And once you push the Bowden tube in, just grab that red clip and secure that in place. That'll make sure that the Bowden tube can't pop back out. And then similarly, we're going to take the other end of the Bowden tube, insert it into the top of the extruder, and take this little retention clip, and this retention clip will fit into the little slit that's kind of in the middle right there. And it'll do the exact same thing. It'll just grab onto that Bowden tube and make it where it can't push further down into the gears or pop out. We'll also grab one of these red clips and insert that into the Bowden tubing or the Bowden fitting on top of the hot end. And then we will grab the stepper motor extension cable. This will take the plug from where the old stepper motor and extruder was located, and it'll allow us to move that over to its new location. So just plug in the male to the female end and then plug that in to the top of the stepper motor that is on your new extruder. The last step really on the hardware side is just to do a little bit of cable management. This goes a really long way. Cable management is so important to make sure that nothing gets pinched, nothing gets torn. So I just went ahead and took that new extension cable and routed it around the existing PTFE tubing and the existing cable braid. And then on that printed filament guide, there's actually 2 slits where you can feed these zip ties through, which is a really nice way to kind of secure it off to the side. So as you see here, I used both of them, and this is a pretty simple way, yet effective way to make sure that this extension cable does not get in the way. Then the last step is to update the E-steps for this extruder. Since it's got a different gear ratio, if you don't do this, your parts will either be over extruded or under extruded. So MicroSwiss has a simple G-code file that I'll link you to where you can download it, put it on your micro SD card, and then just go down to it and hit print as if you were printing out a test file, and it will very quickly and effectively update those settings for you, which is really nice. The other thing I do recommend doing is re-leveling your bed. Definitely every time you change anything, even as simple as a nozzle, you should re-level your bed to make sure that everything is correct. So a quick re-leveling, and we're ready to print. The only things I really changed in my slicer was the retraction distance to 1.5 millimeters and the retraction speed to 35 millimeters a second. MicroSwiss does also state that you may need to bump your temps up slightly, like possibly 5C, higher than you're used to printing. I print PLA incredibly hot, so I just left it as is, which was at 220. And as you can see here, the part turned out absolutely beautiful. I was so excited, and I cannot wait to do some more printing with this new setup. I hope that you found this video useful and that you successfully installed this upgrade into your 3D printer, or at least have a much better idea of what the install looks like if this is an upgrade that you are going to be considering. If you have any questions about anything that I did cover or perhaps didn't cover, let me know in the comments down below. And I do plan on using this 3D printer in quite a few upcoming videos with printing various materials or showing off different slicer settings, so you will be able to see this upgrade printing a lot more in action in some upcoming videos. On that note, don't forget to like and subscribe for more great videos. We make a video every single week, so there is always fresh content coming your way. If you do want to support the channel furthermore, I will place links down below in the description over to my Patreon, where there are some really awesome rewards. And as always, huge thank you to all of my current Patreon supporters. You guys are awesome. I appreciate each and every one of you, and you guys really allow me to spend more time doing what I love, which is making content for you all to enjoy. On that note, this has been Daniel from ModBot, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace, guys.